All right, let's get right into it. Today, we're unpacking a pretty wild story based on our source material, a startling confession about massive corruption, the powerful people involved, and the ghosts that, according to these articles, are still haunting the system. So, it all kicks off right here. Picture this. It's 2020, and the sitting president of the Philippines, Rodrigo Duterte, gets on national TV and just admits it. He says he knows exactly what's going on inside the Department of Public Works and Highways. He calls out ghost projects as the main racket. I mean, this was a jaw-dropping moment that threw a huge spotlight on one of the country's most powerful agencies. Now, you'd think after a bombshell like that, heads would roll, right? But what our source material shows is something, well, a lot more complicated. It was a huge public accusation, but it was followed, almost in the same breath, by a very public defense. At first, it really looked like things were happening. An anti-corruption task force gets expanded in late October. Then, a week or so later, we get that big televised address. The president orders audits. He tells the corrupt officials to just quit. But then, well, according to the sources we're looking at, it was pretty much crickets. No big-name resignations, no major convictions. And here's the twist in the whole thing. While Duterte is calling out this main racket, he's also putting up this protective wall around his DPWH Secretary, Mark Villar. The argument was essentially, hey, the guy's already rich, he doesn't need to steal. The sources we're looking at frame this as a kind of presidential pardon that shifted all the blame to nameless officials down the ladder. All right, so the president's pointing fingers, but not at the guy in charge. So what does Secretary Villar do? How do you officially respond when a crisis like this is blowing up in your own department? Well, the response was, as our sources put it, straight out of the damage control playbook. You know the drill. Step 1, create your own internal task force. Step 2, make a big announcement about blacklisting some contractors to show you're being tough. And step 3, talk up all the cool new tech you're using, like drones and geotagging apps. It all looked very impressive, very decisive. But here's the thing. While all of that stuff looks great in a press conference, the sources argue it was basically just for show. Think of them as paper shields. Great for appearances, great for managing public perception, but not so great for doing the deep, systemic cleanup the department was said to need. So you gotta ask, right? Did any of it actually work? Did the task force and the fancy apps actually get rid of the ghosts in the machine? To figure that out, the articles we're explaining follow the money. They look at the official audit trail. And well, those audits tell a very, very different story. So on one hand, you have the official story from the DPWH under Villar, and it's a great story. We're talking thousands upon thousands of flood control projects finished, bad guy contractors taken care of, everything watched over by modern tech. It's a picture of success. But then you have what the government's own auditors, the Commission on Audit, found. And their version of the story for that exact same time? Yikes. We're talking hundreds of defective projects, more than $1 billion pesos just vanished into uncollected advances from contractors, and hundreds of millions more lost to overpriced contracts. And this wasn't just a one-off bad year. No, the auditors found this was a consistent pattern, something that happened year after year. Key projects, especially for something as critical as flood control, were constantly being flagged as defective, delayed, or sometimes just never finished at all, which of course impacts millions of people. And that brings us to this number, which is just staggering. Fast forward a few years after the big confession and all the supposed reforms, and lawmakers were still flagging nearly 6 billion pesos in suspected ghost projects. And that's in just one province. The articles argue this is proof positive that the racket never really went away. Okay, so this is where the story takes a really fascinating turn, bringing it right into the present day. Remember Secretary Mark Villar, the man at the center of the DPWH back then? Well, today, he's Senator Mark Villar. And get this. One source presents this striking scenario from the year 2025, where Senator Villar is basically giving a sermon to his colleagues in the Senate, talking about how the country desperately needs a comprehensive, integrated master plan to solve flooding. It's quite a statement. So let's just break this down, because the contrast is pretty wild. Back then, as DPWH Secretary, he was in charge of a system that delivered thousands of these small, fragmented projects, the very ones auditors kept flagging. But now, as a senator, he's the one standing up and warning against that exact same approach. There's actually a term for this that the source material brings up: political revisionism. It's a fancy way of saying you reframe your past. Instead of it being about what happened on your watch, you shift the blame to this big, abstract problem with the system. So, where does all this leave us? What's the ultimate takeaway here? According to the articles we've been breaking down, why does this whole saga, the confession, the paper shields, the irony, why does it still matter so much today? The way the sources see it, it was almost like an unspoken pact. You had President Duterte, who exposed the crime but made sure to publicly clear his chosen leader. And on the other side, you had Secretary Villar, who put these cosmetic reforms in place that looked good, but, as the audits suggest, didn't actually fix the system. And this leads to what is probably the most devastating conclusion from our source material: the idea that this whole approach didn't get rid of the corruption. Instead, it was embalmed, preserved, so that it could continue to feast on public funds long after the main players had moved on. And that leaves us all with one final, pretty provocative question. When a massive problem is confessed out loud but never actually cured, who is accountable for the ghosts that are left behind? It's a question about leadership and accountability that, according to these sources, is still hanging in the air.